So thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Welcome to the webinar. This webinar is looking at ecosystem building and is part of a broader series of webinars that ROI has pulled together. As a little bit of background to this webinar, we've been working over the past 6 or 7 months to pull together a number of case studies that look at what rural communities are doing to support entrepreneurship, the different types of programs and activities and initiatives that they've found that are really scalable and can be tailored to the rural context. So in doing this, we had a lot of conversations around the table with a broad advisory committee, and there was this sense of what do entrepreneurs need in terms of programming, and there was this idea that they need the right services or programs at the right time. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's many different things at many different times in the development of a business and in the rural context that people know. So we pulled together some speakers that have great experience in managing this broader network of programs and services in the rural context. We're very excited to have them here today. A few housekeeping items for everyone. If you're new to using Zoom, we've muted everyone who's on the line. So if you'd like to chime in and offer comments, your own stories about ecosystem building, or a question for the folks on the line, please feel free to do so, but just make sure that you unmute your phone prior to doing that. So you'll see the audio button there that says unmute on your screen. That being said, I encourage everyone to be as active as they feel comfortable. I think it's always great when we can have some back and forth storytelling, and please feel free to offer your own comments. If there's any other questions, we are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to review this at a later date. If you'd like to add questions to be answered by the folks through the chat window, please feel free to do that. And if we're not able to get to them, then we're able to follow up later. Another great thanks to Danielle Collins, who's joining us today to be the moderator. Really appreciate your help here, Danielle, and I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So hello, good morning, everyone. I'm calling in from Guelph, and I just wanted to say I'm really excited to have a chance to talk about this topic today. I'm really glad that ROI has chosen to tackle this subject, because I think it's so important to the work that we all do in our communities. So a little quick background on who I am. So I work for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and I'm an economic development policy analyst. So I do quite a bit of work on rural development and rural issues, and making sure that agri-food and agriculture can grow in our small rural communities. But in addition, I'm generally very interested in economic development, so I'm excited to be here today. And the topic of ecosystem building, it really does resonate for agriculture, but also more broadly, the importance of relationships and the culture of innovation. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our speakers today. And I'm also happy to be working with Ryan again. We, in his previous role at OMAFRA, we worked together on the Agriculture, Economic Development and Planning Community of Practice, which is similar to the concept of today, sharing some great experiences and stories from across the province. So thanks for inviting me to be here. So we have a great lineup of speakers today, and we're talking about...
I didn't have network access. Just trying to find it.
So we're talking about ecosystem building, but part of what we're focusing on is the Kaufman's Foundation and some of those key elements for a thriving ecosystem that will be covered in more detail today. So just to give you a high level, if you hadn't had a chance to read through the case studies yet, we'll be looking at topics around entrepreneurs, talent, knowledge and resources, champions, open participation, intersections, stories, and social capital. So first up, we'll have Mark Hanley, and he's the enterprise facilitator at Hastings County, and he'll be able to provide some more context on the Kaufman Foundation and what he's been doing in his work. So I'd like to now turn it over to Mark Hanley.
Hello there. I'm unmuted now. Okay. As illustrated in the case study, in a long conversation with Ryan one day, I told him how this project came about in our region. I had taken a role with Kingston Economic Development running their small business office. And in the first couple of months there, I realized all we were doing in the small business office historically was citing regulations, telling people how to register their company, how to register for different taxation. And we were sending people to websites or to booklets to create business plans in solitude. And having owned 10 businesses of my own in the past, I thought none of my businesses started that way. We weren't really doing something that was helpful to get people started. So I had a young lady in the office who said, I have a solution to your problems. And she threw a book on my desk called Ripples from the Zambezi. Ripples from the Zambezi was written by Ernesto Ciroli, and it was about a project that he was doing in Australia, in a little town called Esperance, and the technology used to try and help the local economy. It really resonated with us. We got a group of people together. We started the project. We collaborated with Hastings County, Prince Edward County, and Lennox and Addington County. And we brought Ernesto Ciroli up here to speak to us. His methodology, the things he talked about with building community and working with individuals with passions really resonated with us. We encouraged him to come here. We found some funding to pay for him, and he did a training program, and we launched these projects about 10 years ago, one in Kingston, one in Prince Edward County, and one in Hastings. And the following year, we did one in Lennox and Addington County. The basis of the program was to get the community engaged to support people who had passion about something. And there would be a person assigned the role of enterprise facilitator, a term that Ciroli has coined. And that person would just facilitate people's ideas and help them put together their ideas. The second part of it was developing a community board, a resource board of people in the community that really represented the community. And that was of real interest to us because the way Ciroli described it was we had to take a look at who the community was, demographically, geographically, sociographically, and try and get representation from all the groups. I could have gone to my local Rotary Club, found 50 members and said, sit around and be resources on the board. But I would have had a very homogenous group. And when I asked them to introduce me to different people in the community, they probably all would have introduced me to each other. Whereas Ciroli said, go out there and find young and old, rich and poor, people that are stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads, people that are students, retired, and get people to represent each of the groups in the community to sit around your resource board. The resource board met once a month. The enterprise facilitator would approach them with challenges that he'd seen with entrepreneurs in the community and ask them to open their Rolodexes and address books and identify people that might be able to help the entrepreneurs in the community. Very much like a barn building exercise of past. When someone came to one of our rural communities hundreds of years ago, the community helped them build a barn so they could stay there with their livestock over the winter and hopefully stay in the community, building community capacity, and hopefully attracting a church, a railway station, a school, and the community would grow. Well, Ciroli's foundation for this resource board was to get people from the community to start to help and support entrepreneurs and people with passions and ideas in the community. The second role of the resource board was a real interesting one as well. Each member of the resource board was tasked with introducing the enterprise facilitator to 10 people in their network. When I took the role of enterprise facilitator in Kingston, I had some interesting meetings. I had one lady that said, well, let's do it all at once. We're going to have a potluck dinner at my place. I'm going to invite all my friends, and halfway through the dinner, you're going to stand up in the chair and explain the program. And these people then became ambassadors and marketers of the program, telling people. The request at the end was always, If you see someone with a passion and they don't know where to turn and they need some help, give them my phone number, introduce them to me, and we'll sit down with them and see if we can get them started. One of the other people in the group was a retired school teacher, and she said, I have a bridge game at my place every week with a bunch of retired school teachers. Would you like to come over and just talk to the group before we start playing bridge? So with 50 people on the resource board, each introducing the enterprise facilitator to 10 people, there were now 500 ambassadors out in the neighborhood in sectors that the enterprise facilitator probably didn't circulate normally. And they would spread the word about what was happening. The first year we ran the program in Kingston, I had 500 introductions to people in the community, and we did no advertising, no website, no flyers, and my schedule was continuously full working with entrepreneurs in the community, people I would have never met. So the organic growth of the program, the spreading word of mouth through the community and getting people engaged in it was a very valuable part of the program. The last piece I wanted to mention was Ciroli talks about something called the Trinity of Management. And he claims that in a business, to be successful, there are 3 different roles that have to be filled. One is the development of the product or service. And typically, the entrepreneurs that we meet are very good with their product or their service. They know what they want to do. They make great coffee. They know how to repair shoes. They're great software programmers. The second role is marketing. And a lot of the entrepreneurs really haven't got that figured out. Who is their customer? Who's their target market? What's their value proposition? What benefits does their product have? And how do they attract customers and sell to them? So this role should be filled with someone who is passionate about marketing, equally as passionate as the entrepreneur is about their product or service. The third role is the financial management role. And this role is the person who figures out what should we sell it for? How much money do we need coming in? Where are we going to get cash for the operation to start up? And that role should be played by someone who is as passionate about numbers as the entrepreneur is about their product. And not a bookkeeper or an accountant necessarily. They're more historians. They look in the rear view mirror of the business and record what happened over the past period of time. We need someone who looks through the proverbial windshield of the business and says, whoop, we've got a huge financial curve coming up here. Let's avoid that and not end up in the financial ditch. And getting someone like that on the team is really important. Pulling those 3 people together in those 3 different roles and getting them to sit down before the business starts. Potentially the marketing person could get letters of commitment or signed orders and put them together in the business plan. The product person could describe the product in the product section of the business plan. The financial manager could speak to both of them and convert all the data they have into numbers. This could then be bound and sent off to a reputable third party in the community, perhaps a financial planner or a bookkeeper or investment person, and they could read through it, review it, validate that the letters of intent or the orders are true, look at the numbers, write a letter of on the thing that their findings, and this is a valuable document, viable business, and or whatever. What a difference that would make to have that document put together by 3 passionate and competent people and reviewed by an outsider, instead of what we were doing previously, trying to train the entrepreneur to fill all 3 of those roles and fill out a business plan in solitude. So when Ciroli brought us these ideas, we thought it was fantastic. We launched. The programs have been running here for over 10 years, very successfully. Mary Doyle will speak to you in a few minutes. She was in this role before I was in Hastings County, and we've had some amazing results with some great businesses opening, and they really feel the community support. It's an inexpensive solution. You pretty much have a facilitator's salary and their expenses. One of the challenges we found here is Hastings County is a large geography. We're the same size as the whole province of Prince Edward Island. So trying to be in each town and be visible in each town on a regular basis does pose some challenges. We could really use 3 or 4 people in these roles to cover that geography. But in a tighter geography, a smaller town or a smaller region, this is an excellent, excellent program. And I'll pass it over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. We do have a few questions for you before we turn it over to the chat box. So one thing we're wondering is how you've used the community resource boards to create networks and intersections. So just curious if you had a few examples for us of some interesting connections you've made through the boards.
Well, like I said, some people hosted parties for me, or I would meet in coffee shops. It was really interesting how passionate people on the resource board were about getting people involved in the community. And I remember one fellow in Kingston, he was struggling in his business, and one of the people on our resource board said, "Come on, you got to come down here and meet this fellow, come into his shop." And what a great relationship developed after that. And pretty soon his daughter opened a business, and he said, "You've got to go see Mark. I got to bring Mark in here." And it just spread. It was a whole chain of events. And when we look back at some of the businesses, it was the resource board members' drive that brought them in to really get things started.
Great. And do you have some advice for how, if a community wanted to do this, how they'd get started?
I think the first thing is get a group together that's a passionate group about wanting to do something in the community. One of the things that Shiroli has based his methods on is the work he was doing in Africa, the relief work that he was doing as a young man in his late teens, early 20s. And he saw things go very wrong with the attempt to impose Western values on the third world. And one of the phrases he came up with is only go where you're invited. So the community should have to see the need. They should have to want to pull someone in to assist them. And that's where developing this program at work. Trying to impose this program and push it on a community, it doesn't work well. Unrequested help is almost predatory help sometimes. So we have to be cautious that we're not forcing this on people. The town needs to want to draw people into business, create an economy, get some community leaders together, and then we can go and speak to them. We can introduce them to Shiroli or to SEF Canada, which is another group that does this work in Canada, and they can help set up the program.
Great. So we do have a question from the chat box here. So does Shiroli have a website?
Yeah, and SIROLLI, there's just one R. I think it has been misspelt in the introduction to this. So, look at Shiroli.org or Shiroli.com. Google him, you'll come to his site. There's a great TED Talk. If you Google Shiroli, Ernesto Shiroli TED Talk, it's about a 15-minute talk, and it really talks about the foundations of and the principles behind the program.
Great. And maybe if you could just walk through a day in the life. I know you've given us a few examples here, but what's a day in the life of you? I'm sure it's very different every day.
There's as many different ways that the day will work as there are numbers in our system, which is infinite. So typically, I will arrive in a town with a pre-booked appointment. Someone has contacted us, and it's amazing. You sit down in a coffee shop, and pretty soon someone's tapping on the shoulder saying, "Hey, I remember I've been meaning to call you, and I wanted to introduce you to my friend." And I walk into the pub in Bancroft and try to have a quiet dinner, and I'm interrupted probably 4 or 5 times during dinner with people wanting to converse about their business or a friend that's in business, and you really feel part of the community. It's wonderful. Meeting at kitchen tables, meeting in coffee shops, meeting in people's businesses. It's much more relaxing than the atmosphere I was used to with having a formal office with a bunch of diplomas on the wall, wearing a suit jacket, and making people wait in a waiting room before they had a meeting. They were intimidated by the time they came in. And when they came in, they thought, well, this idea about baking cookies in my apartment oven just doesn't warrant this man's time. And being much more casual and informal around the tables, people open up a lot more, and you can really work with them and get to know them.
And we have another question from Peter about, do you measure results? I'm guessing you do. So maybe how you measure results, and then do you publish those?
in this situation, this project is funded by the county, so municipal funding. So our funders do want reports, they do want metrics, and they want to know what we're doing. So Ciroli had created a bit of a spreadsheet for tracking. He's a real believer in spending more time with the people than with the paper, and but I've used that spreadsheet, modified it a bit, and it's a very valuable tool. So we track each individual, why they contacted us, how many times we've met with them, and in the end, the results. So either the results are they've opened a business or expanded a business, perhaps it's still pending or it's on hold, or they've just rejected and dropped the idea. And then I also like to track metrics of how many jobs were created and how much investment they put into the community. And that's a rough estimate. You know, if they purchased a building, we know roughly what they paid, or if they purchased inventory or got loans. I like to keep track of that. One of the things we don't track well enough, and again, we can have metrics for everything. I spend my whole day on a spreadsheet, but one thing we don't track is how long these businesses have stayed in businesses and if they are sustainable. The Kansas project in Northeast Kansas did track that, and over a 5-year period of time, they looked at all the people they'd worked with. Now, mind you, some of them they had worked with just yesterday, but they found that of the businesses that opened after 5 years, in the 5-year period, 80% of them were still open, which I don't know how long they've been open, but they were still open and still active, which was an amazing result.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think we'll move on to our next speaker, and then we'll have kind of the group panel at the end. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And next, we'll turn it over to Paul Nichols. So he's at the Community Futures for Huron County. So welcome, Paul.
Good morning, everyone, and nice to see so many folks on the line there from Midwestern Ontario. I recognize a lot of the names. I'm going to give you a little, for those of you that maybe don't know, a synopsis of the Community Futures program and our role in entrepreneurial development. And these are my opinions, but which I'll hold to. For those of you that don't know, the Community Futures program has been around since 1986, and there's about 268 branches across the country. It's a rural development program in the sense that it serves only rural areas and small towns. It's actually a rather remarkable arrangement. It's one of the few programs in the world where a federal government actually turns authority over to local boards to make decisions on economic development. So it bypasses the provincial government, it bypasses regional governments, and we should actually count ourselves lucky that, because I think maybe when it was established in the 80s, it made a lot of sense. It still makes a lot of sense, but 30 years on, people go, what the heck are we thinking? I'm talking about, federal bureaucrats. What the heck were we thinking when we gave all this authority to local communities? But having said that, all of us have a 4-part mandate, and that includes community strategic planning for economic development. It includes support to community economic development projects, counseling and mentoring to entrepreneurs, and financial support through commercial loans to small and medium enterprises. So we all have that core mandate, but how it plays out varies quite a bit across even the province of Ontario. So in our case, we have a local sort of mission statement that says our role is to help entrepreneurs make good things happen. And that's so purposely broad because first of all, help is an important thing. The ideas, the dreams, they're not ours, they're somebody else's. And we're there to facilitate and point them in the right direction. I would even go as far to say that sometimes we don't even have the authority to say that that's a good idea or that's a bad idea. In fact, what we do have the ability to do is say, there's your idea for a business, and these are the conditions or these are the aspects that if you do this, it's going to stand the best chance of success. So as much as we have to turn down loan applications, sometimes we always have to remember that, yeah, we are a facilitator. The other aspects of our mission statement is entrepreneurs, and we actually define 3 bodies of entrepreneurs. They are obviously the individual private sector person that wants to launch their own business or wants to expand their business. But we also look at something that we call volunteer or civic entrepreneurs, who they may be on a board of directors for a not-for-profit, but have a great idea around revenue generation. And we do some work around social enterprise around that aspect too. And the other one we view as entrepreneurs are public bodies like municipalities. So municipalities come to us with a great idea around economic development. And again, we try to play that same role of, oh, we don't say whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. We just say, oh, if you do this and this and this, I think you've really got something going there. A good example, which we'll see in a future webinar, is the Witness Space program, which we've been heavily involved in our territory. So in essence, what we do and sort of my day-to-day activity is, we do the business counseling aspect, one-on-one, usually with entrepreneurs. The lending aspect, people come to us if they can't get financing from other traditional sources like banks and credit unions. But the other big piece is the development of networks. And we've already started talking a lot about that. And there's two kinds of networks that we really focus on. One is a referral and a resource network, right? So folks like myself and Mark would agree, we can't know everything about everything. So developing that knowledge base within the community through our boards or through our community members, and say, you want to know about the hemp industry. Well, here's the go-to person to understand what's happening in the hemp industry in rural Ontario. So there's an example. The other big networking piece, though, is the formation of networks of like-minded entrepreneurs. So over the years, we've helped form organizations like a tourism association, where the tourism operators can actually network and support each other. Same with manufacturing. Even those entrepreneurs in the arts and cultural sector as well, we've helped them establish these groups where they pretty much now run on their own. So they're out there supporting one another and working on joint initiatives. And I think that's a very, very important piece of what we do. I think, just to close off a little bit, the one thing I want to get across is, and I always have to remind my board and my staff and my community partners, is entrepreneurial development is a very, very important core piece of what community features organizations do, but it's a means to an end. We were established actually to create a better conditions for economic development and business growth in our communities. And when the program initially started, it was in hard-hit communities and sectors. So where the forestry industry was closing down or loss of jobs in manufacturing. So now it's pretty much universal across rural Canada, but the essence of the program is still the same, which is it's about how do you create the conditions in your community that are going to help small businesses thrive. And for some, it's going to be running the program, like Win This Space or doing training. For other ones, it's just a bit of advice or a referral. And again, for other ones, it may be financing. So just a quick comment too on the challenges of that work. I agree in terms of the geography. Now, we don't have near the size of geography that Mark was talking about, but what we have is these insular pockets of communities. And if some of the most important work that we do is encouraging those entrepreneurs to network together, it's actually quite difficult because many of those communities are very insular. They may be only 10 minutes down the road, but the entrepreneurs from Seaforth maybe don't really want to have all that much to do with the entrepreneurs in Clinton, even though they have much in common. But they see themselves as part of a different community. The other thing I wanted to raise about entrepreneurial development, though, is in terms of our clientele, we always see this polarization. And in my mind, there's two kinds of entrepreneurs. There's one kind of entrepreneur that is hungry for information, hungry for advice, hungry for networks, and they'll take everything they can get, every bit of good advice or resources. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which are those, and I guess you would call them lone wolves, but they, you know, they wouldn't, I like the comment about, you know, don't go where you're not asked to go. So there's a strong contingent of entrepreneurs in, well, probably anywhere, but rural Ontario in particular, that they're going to be the last ones to ask you to come to town. So that's a challenge I just wanted to throw out there. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Paul, I just wanted to chime in and ask, maybe we had a great meeting with one of your clients in the tech industry, and it's a really great story of how you were able to bring together a lot of different players to support that business. Would you be able to tell that story for folks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, so we have I'm actually speaking to you this morning from downtown metropolitan Brussels, Ontario, population 1,000 people. And Brussels is home to Vital Imagery, which is the second largest purveyor of digital images in the world. The only larger one is Getty Images. And they've been one of our star clients for over a decade. And I won't get into the details, but one day their bank, which was the major financer, decided to call the loan. And so within a moment's notice, they needed to raise about 1.5 million because that was making up the difference of what the bank was holding. So long and short of it, we were in a great position because of our networks. It comes back to those networks again. And it's quite a deal. There's a lot of players involved, but we went back in first. Then we worked with the local credit union, which came in as a big player. Then we were able to take that to a fund called SOFI, which some of you may know, Southern Ontario Fund for Investment and Innovation. And finally, the Export Development Corporation, because they have financing available as well. So it took us, it actually only took us the better part of a month to pull that deal together. So it was about a 1.5 million financing deal, but it was all predicated on the fact that, first of all, those resources were available through the different avenues. And I'll emphasize this part too, is that a huge amount of trust, I think, in those networks. So we trust the credit union and they trust us, and we trust the SOFI fund and they trust us. And so that really helps to move things forward. So it's actually almost you have to do your due diligence, as anyone does, but at the end of the day, it probably got facilitated that quickly because of the characters involved and the personalities involved. Most importantly being that entrepreneur who we had worked with for the better part of a decade and can really vouch for him. So yeah, a good example again of that sort of a referral or resource network.
So Paul, I had a question for you. CFDCs are rural programming, as you said, and rural based. I'm sure urban would like to have access to some of these programs too. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question of how do you kind of play that game of who gets it, who doesn't, and then for those who maybe would benefit from connecting with someone urban, how do you make those connections when you're primarily kind of focused on rural?
It's and of course you understand so many rural businesses have market connections in their larger centers. We actually rely a lot on the municipal economic development departments, like London, for example, KW. There are other urban-based facilities. Communitech Hub in Kitchener is a great example. The Southwest Tech Alliance. So, which is, it's not specifically urban-based, but most of the activity is urban-based. So, and when I talk about the Southern Ontario Fund for Innovation, which is essentially an alternative bank for early commercialization, it's realistically 80% of those loans are going to urban areas and about 20% to the rural. So there needs to, first of all, there needs to be an acknowledgement that the rural marketplace and the urban marketplace are so tightly connected that you can't afford to actually exclude either one or the other.
Great, thanks very much. So I don't see any more. Oh, there is a question just in time. So Peter asks, do you have a homeless entrepreneur program? I'm talking to Andrew Funk, who started programs in several communities in Spain, even though he is an American.
Homeless entrepreneur. Homeless entrepreneur. Define a homeless entrepreneur.
If Peter's willing, he can come on audio if he wants to elaborate on that.
Okay, it's Peter. And it's a program to help people that are homeless develop businesses. So he's done that in about 5 communities in Spain. And there's actually a book on homeless entrepreneurship that I've ordered from Amazon and hoping to get it on Friday. And then I'm going to be talking to him on Thursday about how I could bring that program to Canada.
Fascinating. Thank you, Peter. I'll keep my radar on that. It goes back to my comments that yes, community futures organizations lend, and they lend to people that perhaps nobody else would. And I was actually just meeting with a bank manager yesterday, and it was a very similar situation like that about a social enterprise loan. And he said, "Well, why would you do that loan? Like, what's in it for you?" I said, "Well, again, you have to remember our mandate is to make our community a better place, and if we can use our resources to do that, then we're absolutely mandated and eager to do that." So thanks for that tip, Peter.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, so we will move right along to Mary Doyle. So Mary Doyle is from Rural on Purpose, and she's going to share some of her insights.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And before I say anything about Rural on Purpose, I want to say that, I'm really enjoying the presentation so far. Mark is a friend, and he introduced me to enterprise facilitation, and I am a complete convert. It's part of my whole being. Everything that I do is heavily influenced by that whole experience as being an enterprise facilitator. So I really appreciate that. And Community Futures, I think, is one of the diamonds that we have in our country. One of the amazing programs that is having a tremendous impact on communities all over the country. So, being associated in any way, and I have worked with Community Futures offices all across the country, with that organization is also an honor and privilege. So great job with your presentations. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but when you were talking about the 2 different types of entrepreneurs that you're discovering, I thought that was an incredible insight, because they are polar opposites in how they reach out for or not reach out, and we're supporting all of them. So great presentation so far. Rural on Purpose is a social enterprise. We're about 2 years old now, and I'm a co-founder of that organization. And we are focused on creating economic opportunities in rural communities through entrepreneurship. And we look at fueling entrepreneurial ambition and entrepreneurial thinking in communities. I'm a program developer myself. I have an education background and a business background. And so my personal focus is on building programs that are going to support rural communities. And so we try to pilot high impact workforce programs around workforce trends that are happening globally and in our country, and try to strengthen rural communities that way. So one of the first programs that we developed, that we've been working with a number of communities all over to develop, is our co-working program, our co-working pilot. So we do know that as a workforce trend, independent professionals or freelancers are set to make up the majority of our workforce in the next decade. And that's a huge number. That's something that should be on everybody's radar, because employers are creating these ecosystems within their businesses of employees and freelancers, and they're mixing all of those, and they're employing more and more people who are independent professionals. And so that is really developing. And when you think about rural communities, we don't tend to think about freelancers, but we have 19% of all freelancers actually living in our rural communities, according to global freelancer studies that have been done year after year. So if we have 19% of all freelancers already in our communities, we need to spend some more time engaging with them and finding ways to support them so that we can actually build that ecosystem, and we can start taking part in that whole workforce trend that's developing over the next decade. It's really, really important that we do that quickly. So one of the ways that we looked at doing that was with co-working spaces. Statistically speaking, standalone co-working spaces in rural communities are not profitable. So how do we engage with freelancers and independent professionals if we can't build a standalone co-working center, because we're not going to be in business, after the government funding runs out, because it's not sustainable? Well, that's where we came in, and we decided we're going to start running some pilots, and we're going to do this in a rural on purpose way. We're going to look at what resources we already have in our communities. We're going to look at how we can tap into those resources and into the population that we already have, and we're going to build something completely new. So what we do is we pilot a program that tests for desirability. So does the community even want co-working and to develop this freelance ecosystem? And that goes to the heart of enterprise facilitation as well. And everything that Mark was saying, that you have to be invited in, and you have to have a willing community that wants to do something. So we test the desirability, we test the feasibility. So can the community even build this ecosystem to support it? And viability, is it financially sustainable? So we have to have a yes to all three of those things if we're going to actually build this ecosystem around independent professionals and freelancers. And so we started running a 10-week pilot program called is a rural co-working pilot. And we tested for all of those things. So we educated the entire community about what this whole new freelance workforce that's growing in the world. And we tried to find the freelancers that are in our communities already, because one of the biggest struggles is economic developers have no idea who they are, because they don't track them at all. There's no way to figure out how many people and who are the people that are working from their homes independently in your community. And this is a really great pilot project that pulls all of those people out, and they start putting their hands up and saying, I'm here, I've been here for a long time, and I'm really glad that I'm finding a community of support that I can engage with. So we educate the community, we identify the actual freelancers that are there, and then we look at ways to support them and build that. So co-working is essentially a place for freelancers and home-based workers, remote workers, to get out of their homes and to come and work in a communal atmosphere. So they're working alongside other people who are doing independent professional work. And if we can't do that as a standalone center, because it's not typically going to work, some of them are working, and we're studying that. How do we do that? Well, we started working with community businesses downtown that have underutilized space. And typically, especially in communities where you have seasonal employment, and you have a lot of businesses that depend on really, really strong summer seasons, and they struggle through the winter, if you can provide them with an opportunity to add a secondary income source to their business, they're going to be very, very thankful, and they're going to want to participate in this, especially if it's not going to require any real investment on their part, just some education and participating in a really interesting event in your community. So the whole pilot works on educating and identifying and gathering statistics and teaching the businesses about co-working and getting them to put together an offering for 1 week. And we call it the Co-working Takeover Week. And during that one week, businesses downtown will create some kind of a co-working space or a co-working opportunity for independent professionals and freelancers and remote workers. And they come into the town for 1 week and they work in town. And so we're not asking for anything beyond that. And it might only be a couple of days, a couple of hours in the week, wherever they have that underutilized space and opportunity. And we run this really great event. And what we found is that people were really willing to open their doors and participate in this because it was a free marketing opportunity for them. So we pulled new people into their businesses, and it was free marketing of their business during the takeover week, and they got to participate in something that was a community developed project. So we didn't have any problem with that. We had lots and lots of people participate. And then the freelancers show up and they're excited because they actually get to talk to people about what they're doing, and people are interested in learning about what they're doing. And they start collaborating and they start working with other people, and they pick up business. And they get out of their homes and they have that social connection. And the whole thing develops that way. At the end of the pilot, we have all kinds of really, really great data and a lot of questions answered. And then what we do is we ask whether or not the people who participated in this 1 week event by offering their space as a co-working space, if it's something that they would consider continuing after the takeover week. And we're finding that the vast majority of them said, absolutely. It was fun, it was interesting, it provided some extra income, and it was something that they were going to do. So, for example, the very first community that we worked with was High River, Alberta, and they have a town of about 13,000 people. And they had no idea what co-working was at all. They didn't know that they had freelancers even in their community. And by the end of that pilot, we had 10 co-working spaces that didn't exist previously, and they had 40 freelancers that were using them that they didn't know actually lived in their community. And so they started using that as an opportunity to expand on their marketing of their community as a freelance friendly community, because their real estate agents were using it to attract a whole new demographic of people that were interested in moving there because they had support systems for people. And if you can imagine, you can imagine going to a community that is you can vacation in a small town, and it's the place that you go when you take your holidays. But imagine if you can see yourself doing your work there, and you can live there, and you could buy a house there, and you can stay because you have this support system. It changes the way you think about that vacation property, and you start thinking about it in terms of a whole lifestyle change. And that's what's happening as an extension of this project. So it's just one of our projects that we're working on currently. We've turned the 10-week pilot now into a 30-day challenge. The last one we ran a month ago, and we had 6 communities across Canada that ran it simultaneously in 30 days, and with the 1 week co-working takeover week. And it was again a tremendous success, and we're running it again in September and November this year.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Such an exciting project. I have a handful of questions, but I guess the first one I'm sure everyone's wondering is if they're interested in doing this too, what kind of advice do you have for them on the process? And then also what kind of feedback from the freelancers are you getting during these events?
Okay, first of all, if you're interested, you can check out the website. So there is a challenge site. You can check out ruralonpurpose.com, and that'll give you some more information about our company. But the challenge is ruralonpurpose.com/challenge, and you can find the information about that there. We're only taking 12 communities with each of those pilots in September and November, and we're half full already. So it's pretty exciting because we work with communities all over the world. So the second one, we ran the first one in High River, Alberta. The second one was in Fayette County, Texas. So it was a very different experience there, and it was very exciting. So I'm sorry, the second question was the feedback about from the freelancers. We had freelancers who were saying that they felt isolated, and one of the things that we tracked this time around was that whole feeling of loneliness and isolation that remote workers experience. And in rural communities, it's significant. And so that is the main reason that they want to have co-working options. It's not cost savings. It's not because they're saving money by staying in their home, but they're willing to spend money to occasionally leave their home and work in an environment where they can be collaborative and they can have that sense of community and work with other people.
That's great. Thanks. So the questions are rolling in the chat box here. So would sharing workspaces affect the amount of taxation?
Would sharing workspaces affect the amount of taxation? I'm not sure what taxation, what are we talking about that? Are you talking about from the business perspective? From the actual business that's adding on the additional income? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay, and that's something that you would have to explore with your municipality. Most of the people that are running the project with us are the municipalities themselves. So they are exploring, for example, Okotoks. They ran the project, the 30-day challenge. And so they're using it as a way to explore new ways to make taxing their local businesses, something that's going to work for them, and so that they can actually develop this whole project, and they can increase the freelancers in their community. So they're actually using the data that's coming from the pilot to help form their policies. So it's hard for me to say if taxation is going to be a universal thing with co-working and extra spaces. You're going to have to talk to the municipalities themselves and figure that out. Sorry. And I work with communities all over. So we're running it in Australia as well. And they have a very different form of taxation.
She responded, great, thanks. So I think you answered her question. So for the co-working space, what do you imagine the fee structure would look like to sustain it?
We had a lot of businesses that participated in the pilot and offered their space for free. They used it as a way to market to a new audience and bring them in. So some of them said, if it was a restaurant or a cafe, if you purchase something during the period, we'll give you an amount of money that we kind of hope you're going to spend here. And that's what we're looking for in return. Others set up very formal fee structures where they got a chance to test it, and they got a chance to get feedback from real customers about whether or not that made any sense. We collected that data as well. So we asked all the freelancers how much they're willing, how they're willing to pay. Is it something that they would pay for monthly, yearly, hourly? Would they like to trade and barter services, that kind of thing? So That's all information that you gather as part of the pilot, and each community is very, very different. Some of them came back with, the majority of the participants said they were interested in a barter system. So if the business is looking for marketing support, just like enterprise facilitation, if they're looking for marketing support or some, you know, some other kind of business support, if you barter that away, then you can use their space.
Great. And do you have any specific strategies to get information out to the people who are working from home who maybe aren't as visible in the community, and how do you go about reaching them?
Okay, that's a really interesting question too, because we have a survey that we start immediately at the beginning of the pilot, and one of the first questions that we ask of freelancers is, how do you self-identify? So what do you call yourself? And we give them all kinds of options. And in rural communities, we find that the vast majority of independent professionals and freelancers and remote workers call themselves entrepreneurs. And so if you are trying to speak to a freelancer and they don't recognize the term freelancer, you're not going to actually communicate with them. But we've learned that in rural communities, if you talk to entrepreneurs, then you're probably going to get a lot of the freelancer community in that group.
Excellent. And have you considered using unused space, 60 to 70% in spiritual institutions, which is what we do in Community Innovation Hub, free space, coaching, e-learning, roundtables, and workshops?
And that's coming from Peter, I bet. We open it to everyone. So we have a lot of public institutions that participate in the pilot as well. It's not just businesses. So we had a lot of organizations. Anyone that had underutilized space was welcome to participate. We had the United Way here locally in the last pilot that was able to use their space that way. Absolutely, we encourage that, and it can become, depending on the community need, if the community has a lot of spiritual spaces that want to participate, you could build that into the whole fabric of the pilot. That's the beauty of working with individual communities, is that you're going to build what fits with your community.
Fantastic. And I just have one more question before we turn it over to the big panel. So obviously this is a really exciting program. Do you see kind of awards or some kind of other way to highlight communities that are doing something like this to kind of show that they're an entrepreneur-friendly kind of community? We
do. That's the next part of this whole development. We are expanding it, and what we found is, now that we've started this, the whole thing started as a pilot just to see if there is a need and interest, and if it's feasible and viable. And once we found out that was absolutely yes every time we ran it, but that we also actually jump-started the ecosystem that we were testing for during the pilot, we realized that what comes next is now really important. We have to be able to develop it further and support the businesses and the freelancers that are in those communities. So that's a great question, because we are absolutely doing that, and there is a whole new program addition that's going to be added on in the next year. So.
Okay, one more quick one from Peter before we turn it over to the full panel. So for each community, do you have them post a listing of who the freelancers are? Each
of the freelancers. No, we don't have a listing of the freelancers. We have anyone who has left their contact information with our surveys, the community who purchased it will get that contact list, but we don't publish that list anywhere. The freelancers identify, and we can send them information, and the community gets that, but it's not published. We do have a website for every single community during the pilot, and all of the information about the spaces and the co-working options, that's all published. So it's all on their own website during that time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary. I might direct the first question to start off with Mark. Ecosystem building acknowledges this idea of the right support at the right time and no one-size-fits-all solutions. So how do you successfully build flexibility into your program to ensure you can meet such diverse needs? And we'll have each of you go, but I just thought we'd kick it off with Mark first. Oh, he's not unmuted. Mark, you need to unmute.
There, am I unmuted now? I think the way the program works, it's responding to people who have needs. So you're more flexible by just responding instead of initiating. One of the rules is never motivate, never initiate, never follow up. Just leave the entrepreneur empowered and have them come back to you or have them approach you. And as Shirley said, don't go where you're not invited. So that gives you the flexibility. I think the other thing is meeting people in their homes, in their businesses, in coffee shops, being around, being available and approachable is very, very important. The connections in the community, getting out there, going to community events. When I'm in Bancroft, I always attend the Chamber of Commerce meetings. I attend the BIA meetings. I meet with people at the CFTC up there. Any event that's going on, I show up, and you tend to then get people who are in the woodwork, the people that Mary was looking for that they couldn't identify in the community. They come out to some of these events to explore, and then the conversations start. You leave them with a business card, wait for them to respond to you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And Paul?
Yeah, I'll mirror that again, that, you know, folks in our position need to always remind ourselves that we are facilitators. And that involves a great deal of active listening. And, you know, and again, to the point that, yes, we have to provide some critical thinking to the process. Keep an open mind. And the reason I say that is, in my experience, from time to time, we've had ventures that, you know, didn't appear to make sense at all. And in fact, we backed away. And yep, lo and behold, you know what? Some of those folks are still around and doing just fine, thank you very much, without any help from us. So that's a bit of a, there's always those humbling moments, which says there's no black and white in a lot of this.
Did you have some additional thoughts, Mary?
Just to echo what they've already said, you go where you're invited. And with Rural on Purpose, we don't initiate. The communities ask us if we can come in and work with them. So it's really important that you don't try and push something onto a community that is either not ready or doesn't want it or doesn't need it. So that's my, you know, Mark, I completely agree with you that enterprise facilitation model can extend into all kinds of other areas of economic development, and that's a really, really important premise.
So Danielle, I'd just like to jump in here. I noticed that Tracy Snow is on the line, and she's we spoke with her in pulling together some case studies about enterprise facilitation, but also about youth entrepreneurship and their Kidpreneur program. But I wanted to invite Tracy to chime in. She had an experience of kind of adapting the enterprise facilitator model to her community a little bit, and a lot of these stories are in the vein of how can communities adopt these and best fit them to their communities in that spirit of making sure that it's tailored to what they need locally. So Tracy, if you're available, it would be great to hear some of your thoughts.
Hi guys, thank you for the question. Hey Mark and Mary.
Hey Tracy.
So just, so we started enterprise facilitation, like Mark had said, gosh, 9 years ago now. And how we adapted it, so we still really believe in the model of enterprise facilitation, really believe in the understanding of, you know, that Trinity of Management piece, that the business owner shouldn't wear multiple hats, shouldn't be juggling all the balls, you know, and connecting them to the resources and the tools that they need that they're not good at so that they can focus their energy on what they are. We've adapted it more just to kind of accommodate our community because the premise of never follow up, or what's the word here? Never follow up was a big one. When I'm not working with clients, I'm networking and resourcing. And so if I come across a resource or an opportunity, I always kind of, in my internal Rolodex, as well as our CRM, kind of look at clients that could take advantage of that resource or opportunity, even though they haven't asked me for it. I feel it's my job to be that contact for opportunities for them, and hopefully keep them doing what they're good at, all the time. We still feel that, supporting that entrepreneur at the ground, working with them at their level, at their location, where they best feel safe and comfortable talking about a new idea, new opportunity, an expansion, or some problems. The other part of what we do as well is, so we just don't limit it now to the small, mid-sized businesses. We work with all businesses of all ranges to offer support and facilitation still in that respect, and don't have a board to help support that. We just felt after a couple of years, the board was awesome and very engaged, but I was getting to know, and our department was getting to know, more contacts and more resources just from being on the ground than the board did. And we all felt, the board included, felt that maybe just adapting the way we did it was best for our community. Still a great concept, still talk about it all the time, just we've adapted it differently.
Fantastic. So thanks, Tracy. I'll head back to the panel to ask another question. And what I'm curious about is around partnerships and collaboration. So you have talked a little bit about it, but how important it is for us to not try to address every need an entrepreneur might have, but to be able to look to our networks. So do you have any advice for how to build out your networks for more collaborators in your area to try to make sure that you can all balance your skills and assets?
I can jump in. With Rural on Purpose, we work with rural communities, period. So we're open to working with communities all over the world. And while we're working on a very, very local level and with the actual community, networks that are global are really, really important. And as we're moving into this fourth industrial revolution that we're already engaged in, I think we have to start looking at that use of technology and that connection that it opens up to enhance our local community development. So not all network connections have to be transactional. They can be transformational network connections where you're aligning with people based on mission and values and impact, and that's the focus for your connection. And you can build your local community development around that.
And Mark, I would invite you to chime in as well. Again, maybe if you could go back to that community resource board. I think even if a community is not engaging with enterprise facilitation, it's such a valuable thing to do. So do you have advice about pulling those together and creating a network of like-minded community developers in your region?
I think Ciroli's model of really trying to represent the community was really important. Boil your community down, or your catchment area, whatever you want to label it, boil it down to its basic elements. If you were to take, say, Southwestern Ontario and look at who needs to be represented, what groups are there? There's potentially Aboriginal groups, there's factory worker groups, maybe there's agricultural groups, maybe there's college, university students, maybe there's a military contingent in some area. Take a look at what makes up your community or your catchment area, and make sure you have nodes of each of those networks that are connected. And those nodes will be able to bring other people. Maybe they won't be the participant on your resource board, but they will know someone who will be the participant on the board. And I think, politically, what a great campaign tool to use, to go out there and find every node in your community and get those people to share your share your information, share your contacts, host meet and greets for you. And it works the same way for the enterprise facilitator, just getting out there and getting into those. One thing that, one example I can use is I had a woman who said, I looked across my fence one morning and there was a young lady in the neighbor's backyard. So I stopped to talk to her, and it turned out to be their granddaughter. And she said she just moved to town and she was thinking of opening up a business. So I said, well, you've got to give Mark a call. And I would have never been able to reach that person or know anything about them. So I think this networking through using a team of nodes of networks and getting into each of those networks and doing presentations is really important.
Thanks, Mark. That's awesome.
So I have a point on that I'd like to raise. It's kind of on the flip side of things, but for those on the webinar, you'll understand it's sometimes not all roses out there. And we've all worked in many communities where the collaboration was not there. And I'll try to be as discreet as possible, but we went through a period where probably our single largest, most important collaborator basically divorced us. It was a divorce. It was a political decision. And the repercussions of that were very sad. If we even look at the productivity of both organizations, how we just were not performing to our full potential. And my only advice, well, first of all, I also want to say, I was actually amazed that, what we're talking about now is basically, it's enterprise facilitation and it's core community development. And as I get older, I get shocked sometimes when I realize the world I've assigned myself to is not always the way everybody else does things. And so to run into scenarios where that facilitation piece, that community development piece is not in the philosophy of the organization, I was really taken aback. But my advice is, just be patient. Just be patient. We believe this is the right approach to doing things, and we keep on doing it. And you know what? The folks are coming around. They're coming around. We had a little bit of a disjuncture there, but I think we're back into marriage counseling now, and hopefully it'll all turn out okay. I just wanted to share that with you.
I think that's great. It actually segues nicely into kind of a question about, we have talked about all the positives and the good things. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about a hurdle or two that you've experienced, or things to kind of look out for when you start doing this work, because maybe not everyone is as excited as you, or you don't have necessarily the capacity or resources. So if there's any kind of examples you have of what to look out for.
I can jump in. I think that it's really, for us, we have to have a leadership team in place, and you have to have local leadership to really drive any kind of change. It's great to have lots of support and lots of people enthusiastic and want to be involved, but where projects like this fail, it's when you don't have really, really strong people on the ground who are leading it, and they're the cheerleaders, and they're the ambassadors, and they're the ones that are driving all of this change. So when you find those people, work really, really closely with them, and understand that they are the ones that are going to help facilitate all of this. So that's something that we've noticed, and we won't work with a community unless they have a really strong leadership team in place first.
And maybe I can cut in here. I think one of the challenges that we had was with the funders. Initially in Kingston, it was interesting trying to get this concept across, that we were actually doing outreach in the community and being available and accessible to people. somehow got twisted by some cynics as, oh, you're just going to sit in a coffee shop all day and charge us for your time, and like that's really not economic development. I think it goes against, we're so formalized in a lot of our bureaucracies, and we think we need offices, we need cubicles, we need computers, we need telephones, we need to have websites, and really, Ciroli's model was just so simple. Just make it as simple as possible. Get out there and interact. It was about the people. It wasn't about the bureaucracy and the process. And when we look at a lot of the hierarchies in a lot of our institutions, it's just people reporting to mid-managers who report to upper managers who report to funders, and they always want reports, they want documents, and so much time is taken away from actually being in front of the client that you're working with and assisting them. So I tend to say what I think, and when I get challenged on these things, I just push my way through a bit of a bull in a china shop, I think. And I think your enterprise facilitator or your leader of your project, maybe not the facilitator, but the leader of the project, has to have that attitude where they can push through the cynicism of some of these bureaucracies and break the mold.
That's great. And we'll turn
oh, sorry.
Come on in.
If I may be professorial for a minute, so my degree, my background was in community economic development, and I've actually come to realize that there's really no such thing as community development. There's communities, but then there's active, energetic champion players and the people within the community that they're able to bring on to that excitement and that fulfillment. And you know, and it's not a bad thing; it's a healthy thing, but you know, for every good thing that will get done in this environment, there will always be a pushback from either from the cynics or from whatever else is there. And you know what? It's part of the process. And at the end of the day, when you look back and you say, well, why were people so up against this idea? Or you know, why did they get so disenchanted? You know, just you have to reflect back and say, well, you know, it did what it did, or it was the right time and place for that sort of thing. And if it continues on, wonderful. And if it didn't, you learn from it. So that will just always be an ongoing challenge. And so don't ever let it hold you back.
Great. So we'll turn it over to kind of, again, the positives. So what are the most important components of having a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, even if it's beyond some of the work that you do in your organizations? And Paul, if you wanted to start, since you're up already.
I think, yeah, I think it comes down, for me anyway, it comes down to elements I've already talked about, or we've talked about. But the number one is trust. You need to have players within those networks, within, you know, your circle that you can trust and rely on. And that goes to the entrepreneur themselves, right? That entrepreneur that's taking part in, you know, the shared space concept, right, with the other freelancers, needs to feel comfortable and needs to feel that they can share their stories with their colleagues. So that's a huge component. The second one, as mentioned, was the right resources at the right time. And as facilitators, actually, we have to be great generalists. We have to know a little bit about a lot of things. And when it comes down to specific expertise, then we need to rely back on those resources. And the third one is, I call it resilience to failure. Some things are going to fail, and we should never, ever be afraid of that. You learn whether you're an entrepreneur or, yeah, and the other, I mean, don't be afraid of an entrepreneur that's failed either. There's some of our best clients are entrepreneurs that have failed at something or other. So failure can actually be a good thing. So I think those are my sort of, you know, wrap up comments on that theme.
I can go. Whenever I'm looking at ecosystem building and developing community development, any of that, I always come back to, it's really simple, and it's just about getting to know the community that you're working with, that you're a part of, really get to know them, ask open-ended questions, don't make assumptions, follow any opportunities that are there, and then show that you care about them, empathize with them, welcome vulnerability, be on their side, and then do things with them, create things. So do memorable things, celebrate what they're doing, give them that whole gift of belonging and inclusiveness. And really, that's no different from raising a family. You know, you care and you create. You do those three things with your family, and it's the same thing with the community. So I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, and it's just very basic.
And if I can cut in here, I think it comes down to basic rules of networking is when you meet someone new, don't be trying to push your product or what you need on them. Try and find out what they need. See if you can work to their agenda. When trying to connect with organizations in the community, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to compete for the same metrics. So getting to sit down and know them and know what drives them, know what their purpose is, know what they need to provide to their funders and their masters and help them achieve that gets you a lot more support in the community for your projects. And I think it's, I've been a Rotarian for many years, and our motto is service above self. And really that's what it's about. It's about serving the other person, and you will find that that ecosystem will support you and really build the community as well.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you to the panel. I think there's been so much great discussion on the line, and I think it's at this time, unless someone else is jumping in with any immediate questions, that we'll wrap it up for now. But I think this discussion has been a really important one. We've looked at very specific programs that communities have used to try and address very specific issues, but I think sometimes looking at that broader level of the work that we all do and the general approach to our work is very important. And so that's why I'm really appreciative to Mark Hanley, Mary Doyle, and Paul Nichols, all for joining us today. And thanks, Danielle, for keeping the conversation on point and going. Some of the things that I'm hearing that really stood out to me is the idea of going where you're invited or where there's energy in the community. So really encouraging that bottom up sort of drive, engaging leadership teams, building networks, all those kinds of things are so important in the work we do. But also what I'm really encouraged by is, and Mary spoke to this a little bit, is the great opportunities and quality of life that rural Ontario provides that is becoming more realistic today. Mark is joining us from the dock at his cottage as one great example of that. So this connectivity that we have, and there's really opportunities if we can create an environment that is not only functional for entrepreneurs from a funding and networking perspective, but also enjoyable and vibrant communities. I think rural Ontario has a lot of great opportunities. So thanks, everyone. That would be my closing thoughts. I did want to, before we move on, we have one more webinar scheduled for next week, Thursday, June 20th, and we are looking at the Win This Space program. So we're going back to a very specific program. It's been well received across the province. It has won awards with EDCO and EDAC, and there's a lot of different communities who are adapting this program to fit their downtown revitalization goals. So we're going to be joined by a number of great panelists next week. And so I would invite you to join in. It's at the same time, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And we're going to be talking with some entrepreneurs who've been through the program, some of the folks who've helped organize it, as well as some people from the who've helped to train those entrepreneurs. So a great variety of folks on the line. So thank you everyone again for chiming in. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself. And just as a quick administrative detail, we have been recording this session. So if you'd like to check back to our website, once we've wrapped up next week, we're going to be posting all the webinars up there, so you can check back in with the conversations from the day. So thank you again to everyone, and hopefully we will see everyone next week.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan, for putting this together.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks, Mary.